So when you all were in, I think, a department meeting on a Friday back in March, I was at a ILT meeting that was put on by Dr. Donna Beagle. And Dr. Beagle comes from poverty, actually generational poverty, which we'll get into in just a second, the different definitions of different types of poverty. But so she spoke about like what that sort of brings to the table, what poverty brings to the table in the teaching environment. There weren't a lot of like, it wasn't so much solution based from the perspective of what we can do necessarily directly in the classroom. It was much more like sort of yes initiative level kinds of solutions. But I think there's some good information that can inform us in the classroom. So that's what I endeavored to put together here. And all I have to do is find my slide with notes so that I can start doing that. Okay, so one thing that I found rather shocking was that the federal poverty guideline is about $26,000 for a family of 4. The really shocking part of that is that that number was arrived at like back in the 60s. All right, and then there it is. All right, so just as a general sort of overview of this, Dr. Beagle found in her research that when students are from poverty, when they succeed in post-secondary education, they rarely cite a program. More often, they cite people who believed in them, people who taught them that they have knowledge and skills to contribute to their learning, people who do not judge them, and people who connect them to others who can remove poverty obstacles and provide access to opportunities. So that's was Dr. Beagle's experience as well. She had a particular professor at Portland State who really took her under her wing, went way above and beyond like what anything to do with the topics that they were teaching, and helped support her family and her through her entire educational process. And so she believes that's one of the real important things for people to be aware of and to do with students who are coming from poverty. I'm going to skip a little bit of some of this stuff and try and provide some details in documentation form when this gets uploaded to the website. All right. Some important things that poverty teaches people who grow up in a poverty environment, in poverty. No one cares. Everyone seems smarter than you. Whether you're smart or not, it doesn't really matter. You don't see yourself as smart. It's sort of like the poverty environment that you grew up in is almost like your fault because you're not smart enough to get out of it. Other people must be better than me. They're not living in poverty, therefore they must be better than me. We don't belong in this particular society. We don't get educated. We don't have what we need on a daily basis. That's the other giant piece of this. I know I came from a middle-class background, and to think that on a daily basis, we would have to struggle or about struggling just to put food on the table and things like that was something that was certainly not in my experience. So a lot of this was a bit eye-opening to me. And then also that there's no one really to help. So a lot of the stuff that society, that government has put in place to assist people in poverty really goes to trying to deal with the symptoms and not the actual issues. For instance, like it's probably thought generally that alcoholism is something that folks who are living in poverty deal with all the time. What's actually true, and so government puts programs in place with that thought in mind, yet alcoholism has a much higher percentage in wealthy society, in wealthy part of the society than in poor part of the society. So like alcoholism isn't a cause of poverty necessarily. In some cases, sure, but not generally. Some of the impacts of poverty on folks. Obviously, homelessness, why you might need education or a job actually becomes unclear to folks. You often don't know, from the perspective of middle class, you don't know subjects, norms, and certain vocabulary. You might internalize your poverty as a personal deficiency. The realities of poverty pull and demand attention all the time. And you might have, like your expectations are of what you're able to actually accomplish are diminished because of your, because of the conditions that you live in. All right. I don't have time. There's a whole lot of detail about each of these types, but basically she saw that there were basically 5 types of poverty. Generational poverty, just a couple of things about that. You may have never known anybody who benefited from education. You've probably, and this is common through all the types of poverty, you've probably never had a good experience with the legal system. And in almost all cases, your focus is on just making it through the day. Oh, now do you still see my screen? I see some nodding heads. Okay, good.
Yes.
Right. Rocco, I just had a question. I need.
Yes.
So is it okay if I leave the meeting, because I don't want to, throw you off. So can someone let me know if it's okay for me to leave meeting when I'm doing this?
Can you give somebody else host before you do that?
Okay. So let me try that for a moment.
I nominate Mark.
Back, okay.
Well, it is grayed out for me. When it says who can share, I cannot make a change.
If you right click on somebody's name in the participants window, does it give you any options like 3 dots or anything?
Let me
More?
See.
Yeah.
Shall I try you, Mark?
Sure.
That was my title.
I'll bless you too, Mark. I'll give you a co-host.
Yeah, ask to start video. I see that. Should I click on that?
No. I don't want to start video. Just make me. Oh, Kara's a host now.
Yeah,
Good.
I found out I was able to reclaim host, so I did that.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
All right.
Great.
Awesome.
So Shane, thank you. Okay, sorry about that. I need to attend the engineer SAC with this online course business. So
All good.
thank you.
I just have to find my window again. There it is. Okay. Highlights of working class poverty. They're working, but you just don't have money for any extras. And again, negative experiences with the legal system. Immigrant poverty. biggest impact there is that usually you're not speaking the language. There's a lot of racism and prejudice as well. There's one more or two more, Depression era poverty. I know my folks grew up during the Depression. They had a certain view of the world. And this one actually sounds a lot like our current COVID situation. The societal messages were like all in this together, and poverty might be seen more as a societal problem. And then there's finally situational poverty, where people who are educated and are able to learn a living, but something happens, could be healthcare, divorce, or other crisis, income drops, and now you're thrown into poverty. They didn't, in the session, they didn't really talk much about like which of these types of poverty are most prevalent in our students. But we do know that a lot of folks who come from poverty, it might be generational. It's certainly the case when folks are first-time college students. So that's sort of the background information about different types of poverty and their impacts. The solutions going forward, like I said, were much more higher level. So we'll just quickly run through some of these best practices for creating a culture of caring. The strength perspective. So really focusing on that people's potential is unknown, and raise expectations through and usually help provide a network of support. So for instance, I don't know how, well, I'll go into that in just a second. Next up, resiliency theory. So encourage ways to highlight, again, strengths. Social capital, try and break isolation. Strengthen community partnerships. So for instance, maybe the grocery grant program that was announced, I think on Friday, that might fit sort of into that social capital segment. And then one point that I found really interesting was this idea of the difference between an oral and a print culture. And the oral culture is more what people in poverty experience, because they don't necessarily read really well. They don't know all the sort of middle class norms that maybe some of us take for granted. And then the print culture is much more that middle class norm. And like a real clear example of that difference might be the student who speaks up in class, not in turn, right? Without maybe raising their hand or something like that. Sometimes that might be seen as being rude, whereas what Dr. Beagle's assertion is, what it might actually be showing is that the student just doesn't understand the norms because they grew up in an oral culture where you kind of have to speak up to get what you need. So again, this was more at a yes level kind of presentation. The nice thing was that this is going to be used in some of the further yes conversations. So hopefully some more specific things that we can utilize in the classroom will be filtering down to us through that, or some of us may be working on some of those things with the yes team. I wanted to mention, which I already did, the grocery grant program for in this time. And also one of the things that I was really happy to hear Diane talk about the computer program that they're trying to put into place, because that was one of the questions that I had big time through this, given that we deliver so much of our curriculum online, and folks not having access to the resources that they need, especially now because they can't go to campus and work in the labs. All right, anybody have any questions? Okay, thank you for your attention. That was my first time speaking on something like this. It's really disconcerting not to really see people's faces. Thank you.
That was good information. Appreciate it.